Hi, everybody. We'll get started in about 15 minutes or so. I just want to double check, make sure folks can hear me. If you can hear me, just respond in the chat box or the question and answer box. I'd just like to make sure all the tech issues are, everything's working fine. Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Like I said, we'll get started in about, I don't know, a little less than 15 minutes now. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. And I see Brittany is already, our co-host has already gotten started. Yeah, just a couple things before we get started. We do have a co-host on, and she's posting links, important links like the webinars. We do archive them on our website, and she's posted the link there. Also, she can answer any kind of tech questions or non-content related questions. Also, if you have questions as we go through the presentation, that's fine. Please type them into the chat box or type them into the question and answer box. The only thing is I won't be able to get to them until the end, but you're welcome to type them in as we proceed so you don't forget them. All right. Let's get going. So this is the Welcome to the Statistics Solutions Chapter 2 webinar. The Chapter 2 is typically the literature review if we're going by the kind of standard 5-chapter model of the dissertation, which is pretty standard, although there are other models. But this one is pretty typical. Okay, so here are the things we're going to be covering: the introduction, the literature search strategy, the theoretical framework, the actual review of the literature, which is, the bulk of the literature review, probably 85% roughly of the literature review, and or of the chapter, and summary. And before we go any further, and you're going to hear me say this several times throughout the presentation, but always obtain your school's template for the dissertation or for the chapters, because that is what your school, your chair, your reviewers are going to use when looking to see if you've met the expectations for the chapter. What we're giving you today is kind of a general outline, and it's the features are pretty common, pretty typical across schools, but sometimes schools will have things that are a little different. So it's always best to have your school's template. Okay. So the introduction, nothing surprising or really difficult here. It's just, reorient your reader, right? So restate the purpose of the study, remind the reader of your research problem or the importance or the need for your study. You can preview contents of the chapter if you want to. Again, sometimes that's required in some templates, sometimes it's not. So we just kind of include that in case. And yeah, so the introduction is not a big deal. I mean, a page, maybe less than a page, a paragraph, a couple of paragraphs. Nothing you have to go in depth on. What usually comes next in the literature review is something called the literature search strategy. Again, sometimes schools call it something different. Methods of searching, sometimes it's called. But the idea here is to describe your strategy or how you search for material for your literature review. And the idea here is to show your readers, to show your professors that you conducted a comprehensive search, right? That to the best of your ability, nothing got through your net, right, of searching. So you can say that you pretty well located articles on your topic that are out there. And they want you to describe that search process so they can tell that you did conduct a comprehensive search. This is a good place to, and the whole thing really, and the whole dissertation really for these sections, use your resources, go to webinars, but also it's a good idea to have a sample approved dissertation from your school, close to your area, close to what you're doing, as an example, at least, one or two, a couple. You can get those through ProQuest, which you can access through your university's library. Sometimes your chair is happy to provide you with an example, but this gives you kind of concrete, you can see what people actually did. So what you want to do for this section, again, it's not a long section, list, start off with a statement, something like you use your school's online library portal, which is usually, I'm assuming, what a lot of people do, to conduct a comprehensive search for relevant material for your lit review. You want to list the databases that you searched and the search tools that you used. So things like Academic Search Complete, Academic Search Premier, Google Scholar. If you're in education, ERIC, ERIC would be a big one. There's specialized databases for business, there's specialized databases for education and for other areas. So list the databases you used, the search tools you used. If you searched specialized journals, you want to include that. Also include your key terms that you used to search for material, and this can include the terms and combinations of the terms. And there's really no curveballs here, right? These are going to align with the variables and the factors and the major concepts of your study, the theory. So they're going to be based on that to get, obviously, material that's relevant to those things that are in your study. Then the last thing here, this is kind of an important section. Include any way that you filtered or qualified your search. What does that mean? That means when you're in the search function, right, in your you're in your school's library, and you can kind of modify your searches. For example, there's an option for only giving you studies published in English. That could be one way that you qualified your search. You could only have the search return full text items. That's another way. Anything like that. But the next two are pretty important: data publication and peer reviewed. The gold standard for literature reviews is the peer-reviewed academic article. Okay, you can use books, but I would use them sparingly. You can use information from websites, but I would only use that for statistics, like if you needed recent statistics from like a government site or something like that, you can use that, but you're not like reviewing the material from the websites. So really the currency of the lit review is the peer-reviewed academic article. So saying that you're explicitly coming out and saying that your search was qualified and limited to only articles that were peer-reviewed is real important. I mean, it tells your professors that you focused primarily on peer-reviewed research. How do you know something is peer-reviewed? Well, one way is by clicking that option when you're doing your search. There usually is a box or something. That will pretty much ensure that what you get back when your search results will be peer reviewed. If you need even more proof or reassurance beyond that, sometimes the journals that your article comes from will say that it's peer reviewed. There's also something called Ulrich's. Okay, Ulrich's Guide to Periodicals, which should also be you should be able to access through your university library. It's something that tells whether journals are peer reviewed or not. So you could double check with that if you really needed to, but usually if you click the full peer-reviewed choice, the option when you're searching, chances are most everything you get back will be peer-reviewed. Data publication is another important one. My slides are stagnant. Are we not at the right slide? Literature search strategy. Is everything good? Okay. Can everybody see the slides? It's on the right slide. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about on this slide. Is down in the bottom box, and it's this little kind of the material to the right there. Questions I will get to at the end. Thank you. So another important way you qualify your search is data publication. So again, check your template. Some schools want material for your lit review to be no older than 5 to 7 years. Some schools want 3 years, which is really tight. Some schools, it's 10 years of publication. Some schools don't give you, there's no requirements. But I think it's typical. I think about 5 years is pretty typical. They don't really want much material, only if it's foundational. They don't want any material, before older than 5 years. And the idea with that is, ideologically, it makes sense when you think about you're really giving kind of a current snapshot of the research on your topic. Because stuff later, unless it's foundational, like I said, studies that were conducted 10, 12, 15 years ago, things have changed probably by that time, right? So it's just best to keep things in your literature review as recent as possible. And another thing that helps with is that means you don't have to go back and search, material for 20 years. It's going to increase the amount of, references and things you're going to get. So if your school, wants, has a requirement for, 5 years only, make sure you put that in your literature search strategy that you adhered to that. Okay. The theoretical framework typically comes next in chapter 2, although again, check your school's template because the theoretical framework can appear in chapter 1 and then again in chapter 2, which is, if it does that, then it's usually an elaboration in chapter 2 from what you have in chapter 1. Sometimes it only appears in the 1, sometimes it only appears in the 2. So again, check your school's template to see what they want. If you do need to put it in chapter 2, like I said, usually it's an extended discussion of the framework that may appear in chapter 1. Here, first thing you want to do is start off to just very clearly say, so-and-so's theory will serve as a theoretical framework for this study, right? Have the name of the theory with a citation and the person who developed it in the year. Define the theory, very clearly define the theory, very clearly define any components that are associated with the theory and that are relevant to your study. Just, talk a little bit about the person who developed it, what they developed it for, what they developed it to explain, because that's what theories do, they explain things. You can discuss a little bit what researchers have used it for. And a key component of the theoretical framework section is, how does it connect to your study? How is it going to guide your study? How is it going to help you explain results in chapter 5? So how does it connect? How does it relate to your study? If you're using, if you're conducting a quantitative study, for example, how the theory would connect to your framework, how the theory would connect to your study has a lot to do with your instrument, right? So if I always use the example of emotional intelligence. It's usually the first thing that comes to mind. But say you're studying emotional intelligence, you're going to measure emotional intelligence in a quantitative study. There are several instruments to measure emotional intelligence with. So whatever instrument you're using, say you're using Goleman's instrument, you then need to use Goleman's theory for your definition of your theoretical framework and for the theoretical foundation, right? So in other words, your instrument and the theory need to match, and not just that you're doing emotional intelligence. I need a theory of emotional intelligence, but again, if you're using Goleman's theory, you're going to use Goleman's foundation. If you're using Goleman's instrument, you're going to have to use Goleman's theory, because instruments are based on theories. They don't just come out of nowhere. Jones, hypothetical example, may have a theory of emotional intelligence. If you're using Jones's instrument, use Jones's theory. So you get it. So you don't want to cross instruments and theory. So you don't want to use Goleman's instrument and use somebody else's theory, right? Because these things usually align. So the other question that's probably going to come up is, what's the deal with a conceptual framework? What's the difference between a conceptual framework and a theoretical framework? For our purposes, I think it's really just enough to know that conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies, and theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies. So if you're conducting a qualitative study, for example, typically they're more exploratory. Sometimes there's not theories to kind of cover everything you're doing. So you would use major concepts that you're focusing on in your study. So if you're doing a qualitative study, say on student engagement, somebody has a model for student engagement that includes a social component, an academic component, and a behavioral component, right? So it's social engagement, academic engagement. What's the other one? Social engagement, behavioral engagement, academic engagement. So you would use that, you would define engagement, and then you would define those components and talk a little bit about how they relate to what you're trying to get out in your qualitative study. The framework for the qualitative study is also important because it helps guide your interview questions. Again, like your interview questions don't come out of nowhere, right? You're not just kind of, they have to come from the literature, and usually your framework helps, the literature on your framework helps guide that. Okay, and again, another helpful section to look at, what people have done before in sample dissertations. The review of the literature is the next section, and this is the lion's share of the portion of the chapter 2, which is the literature review. 80 to 85% of it, I would say, is just the actual review of the literature. So what people struggle with in this section is really organization, because you got a lot of material. Right, you have a lot of articles that you pulled, a lot of studies that you pulled, and what are you going to do with it all, right? How are you going to organize it all? How are you going to present it? So the best thing to do, and the easiest thing to do for you as a reader, for you as a writer, and something that's very reader friendly too, is you're going to have to subsection it out. You're going to have to, use headers and sections. And these sections should be really based on, the ideas in your study, the factors, the variables, the major concepts in your study, right? To let those guide the structure of your lit review section. You can even use subheaders, within sections if you need to. The review of the literature consists of synthesis and analysis. Let's just cover those two things. So yeah, so professors like to see synthesis in the lit review, and it's kind of necessary in the lit review. What does synthesis mean? I mean, generally it means combining, two or more different parts to form a whole, right? So what you're doing is you're combining information from these studies to make points. Synthesis really kind of happens at the paragraph level. And you can use standard paragraph organization strategy, right? And I've just kind of reiterated that here. Topic sentence, sentences that illustrate or show evidence of the topic, and then a kind of a summary sentence. And the reason why I kind of taken us back to middle school or wherever we learned that is that, sometimes people get in the middle of the lit review and they could just get lost and I don't know what to do. And then sometimes they'll say, my chair wants me to follow the meal plan, the MEAL, and that stands for something specific, but basically it means, it's talking about paragraph organization. What's the meal plan? I don't know what the meal plan, what am I going to do? Remember, go back to your foundational learning about English and the paragraph level, right? So here's an example of synthesis at the paragraph level. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'll highlight a few things that I want you to see. Obviously, the yellow is the topic sentence. The green is the evidence that it's related to the topic sentence or that supports the topic sentence, and the teal is the summary sentence. So, just to draw your attention to a couple elements of it, the topic sentence. Recent research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. Okay, and then what you have following that in the green section, the support, is information from the studies showing that, right? It talks a little bit about what the studies were on, and very specifically about what they found, and how that helps to support the topic. And if you've noticed, I qualified the topic sentence with mostly, research has mostly shown. Because when we get down to Phillips, this is like the 1, 2, 3, 4th sentence from the bottom. Unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control. So that's one that was kind of an exception. It didn't show that it's helpful. But then there's an explanation here, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So, and then you have the summary sentence that says empirical evidence from recent research largely supports, right? So most of it does, except this exception. And again, with this exception, I kind of included a little explanation about why their findings may have been different. And that also, that little exception part with the Phillips that had different findings, that also shows analysis too, because you're making a kind of, an evaluation about the study, like it may have had limitations, it may have affected the results. So this is what they're talking about when your professors are talking about synthesis, right? And then you move on to the next point. And it includes details about the studies brought together to make a point. And this would be under a section or a subsection where you're talking about the larger issue. Analysis, another thing that professors like to see in the lit review. So it's not just a summary of literature, right? Of the research. I mean, that's part of it. Summary is part of the part of what you're doing. This is another reason why the chapter 2 is challenging. It requires several tasks, right? So you're summarizing, you're synthesizing, you're evaluating or analyzing, So, those tasks are all kind of going on at one time. So that makes it challenging too. But analysis is, so instead of just summarizing things, you're also noting trends in the research. You're noting weaknesses in some of the studies. You're also making connections to your own study when possible. Because if you pull back and think about the larger purpose of the research, of the review of the literature, it's not just to kind of review the literature, right? There's that, but it's okay, why are we doing that? To show what's out there, yes, but also to make a case for your study, right? So by showing what's out there and what researchers have done, you're also showing what they haven't done or what they haven't focused on, or what the weaknesses are, or the shortcomings in the research that like drives or leads to the need for your study. So it's also kind of a big argument for your research problem and for conducting your study. So you want to kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you're writing it, that wherever you can, as you're reviewing the literature, try to make a case, try to relate what the researchers are doing to your study, or, if there's a gap, as these researchers focused on this part of the topic, but not this other part, which is what you're going to do. Always try to highlight the connection to your study and your research problem. Because like I said, at the end, it should kind of culminate in an argument for conducting your study. Oops. Okay, and then the summary. I know that's a lot to kind of cover, but without real specifics. And they're all different. Every lit review is different, even though there's this common kind of organizational strategy. The content is different because everybody's study is different. The summary, like other summaries, recap major points from the chapter, which can include some of the major findings of the literature. Not all of them, but some of the major trends. You also want to remind the reader of your research problem and the need for your study based on what's in the literature and what's not in the literature, right? Because again, part of it is to show what researchers have done in the area, and which highlights what they haven't done, or which highlights the weaknesses of the study or the shortcomings that drive the need for your own study. Okay, right. End by reiterating the need for your study. Okay, I'm going to leave this screen up while I answer your questions, but this is who we are, a dissertation consulting company. It's consulting, guidance, editorial support. Also statistics help. That's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us if you just want to learn more about what we do. Okay, let me get back to the questions. I know somebody had a question about the theoretical framework, which I couldn't get to at the time. Okay. Is lit search the same as systematic literature review process? It sounds the same. There's something called a literature review, like there's a systematic review of the literature, which is a kind of study. I don't see many of those at the graduate level, at the dissertation level, but advanced researchers will sometimes do literature reviews or systematic reviews of the literature. It's a kind of study. So you may be talking about that, I'm not sure, but just a systematic review of the literature as far as a section in your dissertation, it might be the same thing. It sounds similar. Management science is about 5 years. IT demand 3 years. Okay, that's a no for us. Good. Yeah, IT usually it's pretty tight window for previously published material because things happen so fast in technology studies and IT studies. So yeah, that's usually why they have the the 3-year window instead of something larger. Underpinning theory can be beyond 10 years. Yes, the theory can be beyond, the theory can be, I don't think there's a time limit really or publication limit on the theory, because theories take a long time to develop. It's the research on the topic itself that needs to be usually be recent, but the theory it doesn't have time limits usually. Okay, for qualitative studies, must the theory be used as part of the question? No, not your research question, but usually that the framework helps to guide your interview questions. Because again, the interview questions need to be based on something. And usually that's your framework helps to guide those questions. I mean, should the theory be included as part of the research question? No. No, the theory doesn't need to be included in the research question. How to shortlist relevant literature for our study, because everything seems relevant in the beginning. Right. Yeah, it's just kind of about winnowing things down to what's really relevant to your study. It's easy to go down these associative rabbit holes, right? Which that's what I call them. You know, this is connected to this, which is connected to this, which is connected to this, and pretty soon it's like everything's connected to my study. Yeah, you have to resist that. You just have to stay very tightly focused on what you're doing. You know, if it's a correlational study between, you know, two constructs, you know, stay focused on those constructs, and you know, any kind of research on those constructs, especially, you know, if it's relational. So yeah, the studies, this is how studies are different than, like, say, papers. You know, papers have room to, you know, include more discussion of more topics. Studies are focused on the research question, the research problem, and the methods designed to get the information to address the research problem and the research questions. So they're highly focused. So there's no real kind of magic bullet to, like, how do you, but you just stay focused on, you know, what it is you're doing. And try not to get, you know, it's easy to see how, you know, this is connected to this, which is connected to this, which is connected to this. So try to kind of block that off and kind of put your blinders on in a way, if that helps. You know, just, you know, don't look at the stuff in the peripheral vision, look at the stuff that's right in front of you. How can I access recording of this video presentation? Just scroll up to the top of the chat box. Brittany put the link for the webinars where they're archived on our website. Yep, and Brittany answered that. Thank you. Okay, I'm behind. Yeah. Can one use literature as a method for his study? Well, literature is not a method. By that, I'm kind of thinking you mean, can literature review be a kind of study? And the answer is yes. There are studies that are literature reviews. There's a specific way to do that, though, that involves a little more than just doing a lit review. So I would discuss that with your chair if you plan on doing a lit review as your study, because there's a little, you know, you would have to, it does involve a different kind of method. But yeah, the short answer is yes, you can do a lit review. It can be a kind of study, but again, I would talk to people at your school or talk to your chair about doing that, and make sure you understand what it takes to do a lit review as a study. Okay, good. All right, those are the questions in that one in the chat box. Let's go to the question and answer box. Further explanation on how conceptual framework is related to qualitative and theoretical framework to quantitative research. I don't know if I can give you more explanation. You know, the theoretical framework is, in quantitative studies, is, again, it's you know, if you're studying the relationship between emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, right, you're going to have instruments to measure each one. And your theoretical framework then would be a combination of a theory of emotional intelligence and a theory of transformational leadership, where you would just explain what each of those things mean, relate any of the components that you're measuring, define the components, and kind of relate that to your study. But again, you want whoever developed your instruments, you want to use their theories. The qualitative, the conceptual framework, sometimes you would use, you know, you're going to use concepts or major concepts and not like a full-blown theory. And you basically do the same thing, define the concepts as you're going to be using them in your study, and talk a little bit more about, you know, how they're going to guide. And, you know, I know this is, it's hard to get your head around it because it's just kind of words in the air. That's why looking at samples in these dissertations is a good idea. So you could get, you know, concrete examples of what people have done. Okay, here's a question again about the framework. I noticed you mentioned conceptual framework is for quality. You have that reverse, qualitative studies, and theoretical framework is for quantitative studies. If you're doing mixed methods, should you use both frameworks? This is, I hate to hedge on this one, but this is kind of study dependent. Because let's say sometimes mixed method studies, you're conducting a quantitative study, and some people sometimes will include a qualitative portion just to get some added information to help explain the quantitative results. So in that case, you probably wouldn't need a conceptual framework for your qualitative portion, because it's really the same, it's focused on the same thing, it's just kind of adding additional information. So in that case, you would not need, I don't think, two separate frameworks. Now, if you're doing a mixed methods and your qualitative framework, I mean, your qualitative portion is somehow, you know, it's related to your quant, but it's its own thing in a way, then I could see needing you know, two frameworks, one for each. And again, these are questions too because every study is different. Again, we're going to give you, you know, like general information, but, you know, go to your chair, talk to your chair, see what they suggest. Is there a checklist to confirm your model is in good standing? I'm not sure I know what that means. Your school has checklists. They'll have a template or checklist, and it usually includes what they're going to require for the theoretical framework or for your model. So I would go by that, and make sure you include all the components that the checklist or the template requires, because that's what, you know, that's what your reviewers are going to do. They're going to check your work against the template or the checklist. Now, whether it's in good standing or not, you know, if you include all the material, that's good. You know, maybe there's issues with phrasing or, you know, something's off, but your chair can tell you that. Okay, any other questions? Let me see. I think I got some more here. How do you access? Let me see. How can I access the complimentary consultation Monday through Friday? Well, there's a phone number and there's an email there. You can use either one of those. We may have an actual calendar too on the website that you can book with. I'd go to the website. Okay, I'm bringing two concepts together. How do I ensure I will go deep enough with my lit review? I'm not sure what you mean by how ensure you go deep enough. If you have two concepts, bring in literature on each one, right? Section them out. I don't know what you mean by deep enough. I mean, you just review the material that's out there on your topic. You just be as comprehensive as you can be. And review the literature and make sure you include literature on both the concepts. I don't know what more you can do. Okay, anything else? Any other questions about the lit review? I know you should probably have questions, but it's a tough chapter because it's long and it's just challenging, but it can be done. I mean, people get through it. We hope people get through it all the time. It's just the real challenge is usually organization. It's like there's a lot of material, and you need to kind of review it, synthesize it, and present it. And usually the challenge is organizational. And hopefully some of these strategies have given you some ideas about that. And again, use sections based on your factors, based on your variables, based on your major concepts. You can even use subsections. That helps. I mean, it's writer friendly and it's reader friendly also. The typical length of the literature review chapter, ? Good question. And I don't have a good answer, only because they're all different. Now, if your school has a length requirement, obviously follow that. I've seen, more generally, I've seen literature reviews that are like 80 pages. I know. I've seen literature reviews that are 5 pages, great. And everything in between. So usually the sweet spot is like 20 to 30 pages, usually like closer to 25 or 30 pages. That's usually the sweet spot. So that's something to shoot for if you don't have guidelines from your school. But again, if your school has guidelines, follow those. If they don't have guidelines, then see what somebody else has done from your school in the similar area. Use that as a guideline. But again, I would, yes, double page. Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're all talking about double page. I mean, double space. Yeah. Yeah, it's always double space, right? Everything needs to be submitted double spaced. I mean, you can, as you're informally typing notes to yourself or just kind of drafting, you can use single space, but everything you submit to your people should be double spaced. Yep. So that's what I was saying, double space. Yep. Let's see, lit on average is about 60% of your total thesis. Just imagine it's 100 pages. Yeah, that would be right. Okay. Any other questions on the lit review? Okay, well, good luck, everybody. Again, if you think you want to find out more about what we offer, if it's right for you, I mean, feel free. There's no obligation, obviously. But good luck and use your resources. And I wish you luck. And I hope everybody has a great day. And thank you for attending. And we do have other webinars on other topics and other chapters. So check our calendar and see if there's any other ones you need to or would like to attend. Great. Thank you. Take care.